stuff that we're going to do over the next little while. So, all right, welcome back. We are game 3004. That's Mobile Game Dev 2 in the winter 2022 semester at George Brown, and it's week 13, part 1 of our broadcast. I'm just going to copy this link for those people who need to see it live and all that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about as we wind up the semester, what's due, what's going to happen, how we're going to wind it out, and all that kind of stuff. For me, it's always been wonderful working with you guys. You guys are a great group. But we're going to wind it up. We still got some stuff to do before we go. So sure video is going to be good. Guess that's the lecture video for today. So what are we doing? We are week 13. This last 2 releases are kind of linked together. Even though they're separate, I want to just mention that week 14 and 15, that's next week and the week after, there are going to be a couple of things happening. So project part 7, that's your final release, is going to be due next week, or it should have been, but if we look at the calendar, we know that Good Friday is on the 15th for those people who follow Easter, people who are who celebrate. So 15th, 16th, 17th, I'm not giving you anything those days, 15th, 16th, 17th. So that means that typically it would be due on the 17th, but Easter moves around every year. So I'm going to make it due on the 18th. So that's when your final release is going to be due. So that's Monday, the 18th of April. Now that is also the last week of semester. So the 18th, this is actually week 15, but I'm counting it as week 14 because of the holidays. So that's when it's due. However, also on that same week, on the Tuesday, that is when you are going to start presenting, just like we did before. So week 15, which is starting off on the Monday again, and it has on Tuesday and Thursday, we're going to kind of put together some time slots again for your final presentations for your project. Now, by this point, everything should be fully complete and working and all that kind of greatness. And what I'm looking for is a really great little project that you've built up over the semester. That is a mobile design project. And I think it's going to be a great opportunity for us to go through it and see, what it's going to look like at the end. So that's the due dates. So that's just letting you know these are the final 2 pieces to the puzzle, if you will. This week is the second last lab, which we're going to do. It's Lab 9. Lab 9 is going to be all about performance profiling. That's what's coming up this week that I'm going to get you guys to do. And so, yes, we're sitting at week 13. We just did procedural world generation last week as a replacement for weather and all that kind of stuff. We do have a project postmortem and retrospective, which is part of Lab 10 that is due. And that's what I was going to do for you. Again, that feeds into your final release nicely, those 2 weeks. So this week is all around optimizations. How do we do optimizations? And how do we do performance profiling? And how do we add that to the game that we've been doing all semester? Now, that goes outside of the procedural world generation so far. However, I want to mention that I'm okay with continuing with procedural world generation updates and kind of fun, because again, it's just it's like we're doing our mobile game, but we're doing it procedurally. And here's where I'm going with this. I'm just going to put it out there to you. Procedural world generation, we will see the performance hit. We will actually see how we can memory profile a lot of it, right? Where if I was to do it with a regular game, it's harder because you won't see the spikes as much when it comes to some of the stuff that we're going to be doing. Okay, so that's something that we're going to be. Yeah, I know it's Easter Monday, but it's not as bad, Vince, as the Sunday. Definitely want to give you guys that time off, and my hope is that you'll do it maybe ahead of time, right? So that's my hope. But there is no other day because, unfortunately, for the remainder of the semester, if we look at important dates, there's only a few days left, right? So it's just the way it worked out, right? So hopefully you guys have it mostly done. So my thoughts are, and this is just, I'm putting it out there to you guys, when we talk about procedural word generation, then we're going to do some optimizations and talk about things like object pooling and those kind of things that we can do, and see how it can help us with some of those same principles that we've done in the past. And we can actually see the memory profile, how it affects our performance from one to the next. That's one option. Option two is we just go with the previous game. So I'm going to leave it to you to help me decide. I'm not going to be kind of a boss in this thing. I'd rather you guys, we work it out together and we decide as a group. I think that's going to be more rewarding for everybody, because not everyone cares about procedural world generation, and they care about other things. And so, just because I love it doesn't mean that you have to, right? So I'm going to, get input from you guys, a bit of a vote today, since I got a number of you guys here. Mandeep says we kind of did it for our project. I know, yeah, I know that, right? So because you guys did it somewhat different than how I did it, right? So, but still, I think it's, it gives you a chance to test that out. So that's what the plan is for this lab. And lab 10 is all around doing a retrospective, a project retrospective, and it'll be a individual. Normally it's an individual lab, but what I'm probably going to get you guys to do it is it's going to be the only group lab you have, where you kind of get together as a group and write a small retrospective. That's what I normally would do, right? So that's what's going to happen coming up. And the reason why you do a retrospective is like, how did you feel the project went? And this will, again, queue up some more information that you're going to put into, it'll actually help you write some of the stuff that you're going to put into your final presentation, which is something that I want you to talk about. I want you to talk about your project postmortem. So it's almost like free 2%, where you kind of get together and you work it out as a team, like things that work well, things that didn't work well, all that kind of stuff. And then you would attach that to your final presentation. It's almost like a slide or two that you'd build up for, next week. So that's what's coming in terms of the stuff that's happening. But we do have a tech demo, because typically what we have together is 3 hours next week. So things that I've done in the past, other than your project postmortem, are some special topics we can hit there. Example would be something like multiplayer. That's something that we normally would do in the second last week of class. Something that would kind of help you do stuff and think about how to put things together, building upon all the last things that you've done in this throughout because this is kind of a culminating semester as well. So again, I want to get some input from you guys, because I want it to be fun. I don't want it to be something that that's going to be boring for you guys, or you're just doing it because you want to get the marks. So I want you to think about it today, and then let's talk about it a little bit with what we want to do. So last week we talked about procedural world generation. We did a bit of an intro about that. We generated a map with Perl and noise, and we did some interesting stuff with removing colliders, and that's nice. And we actually put them back on, so we had a really neat little application. I'm going to talk about how we can improve that a little bit today, but not much, depending on what we decide to do. And this week, the idea is let's do performance profiling. That's what it's really about with Unity. And your challenge is there is a diagnosing performance profiling tutorial that I want you guys to run this week. Right, it's a separate tutorial that you guys have to do. And then if you run the tutorial, what you want to do is you want to capture before and after snapshots of your performance. And this tutorial is really, if you think about it, it should be used for a test project. But what I would like you to do is use your performance profiling so you can kind of tweak up your beta to make it into your final. That's the idea. All right, so that's the idea that you want to do. So, so that's how I want you. It's kind of, kind of lead into your final release. So that's what's happening there. Okay, so that's the plan. Stuff that's due. Let's talk about stuff that's due. 11th weekly report is due this Friday. That's right. You did some, and I'm glad you did it. But we're going to do more, because I want you to do more for your final as well. Because then, did you make any changes to your even though you did your screenshots, you kind of took before shots. Did you do any optimizations for your beta release, or no? Not yet. Right. So we're going to do a little bit more of that. So you took an initial screenshot, right? And now we're going to act on it, because I want you guys to think about, hey, we've done some performance profiling. We kind of know where our memory is and how we can do stuff. How do we optimize from here? I think those are the questions that I want you guys to ask. All right, so that is your stuff that's due. So project part 7, again, final release due week 14, but that is really Monday, on the Easter Monday. Project part 8, final presentation is due week 15, and your peer review 5 is due week 14. That's also due around the same time frame. All right, let's do a couple things here before we move on, and let's take a look at your final release information and what is expected. Obviously, this is exactly what we've been looking at for the entire time. So, all common requirements must be fully functional. Games type-specific requirements must be fully functional, and you're doing a final version history and all that kind of stuff. What I want you to do is in here, inside of your GDD and your release demo, what you want to do is talk about your get some final screenshots and those kind of things. And this is kind of where you have a chance to do a demo video for your final presentation. So this can kind of lead into, here's a demo of my game, final, complete. This is what it's going to be like. Okay, so this is what's happening there. So that's what that is. You can look at the detail online. I've posted that as well for your final presentation. It's nothing that you haven't expected before. Again, notice this is starting Tuesday, April 19th, because we get together on Tuesday. We'll book some time together on the 19th, on the Tuesday and the Thursday timeframe, just like we've done in the past. And you're going to be presenting live. All right. So you choose the best member that feels like presenting for your group, and then we're good to go. Nothing that's too crazy or out of whack. In this case, slides are pretty much what you've already done, but you're expanding on them. Make it beautiful, guys. Make it like like it's your best presentation ever, because it's probably going to be one of your last ones ever at George Brown, that's for sure, at least that week. Do your game demo, and you can use the game demo that you got from your from your final release. That's, I recommend, because you should be code complete at this point, right? And your lessons learned is where you kind of got your kind of a retrospective, and that slide or two, this is like minimum slides, is you can talk about a retrospective, things that went well, things that didn't go well, those kind of things. You'll be recording your presentation, and your gameplay video again could come from your final release, right? But what I'm hoping that you can do is at least demonstrate your game in the device simulator or on an actual device. It's really up to you. If you can do that, that's awesome. So games that are played inside of Unity's editor, I mean, you're going to lose marks for that at this point. I think you should have the ability for you to do it in the device simulator. The device simulator LD player does have input fallback, so that you can mostly move with your WASD keys, and the only thing you'd have to move is the camera with your mouse emulating a finger. So for the most part, I think you have a lot of good opportunity to show off what your game would look like in the device simulator, which is as close as we can get to in this remote, ever connected, disconnected world that we're in, to kind of show us your stuff. Otherwise, in the real world, if we were together, you probably might use some kind of casting software. I may have had, in other semesters, maybe in the future, we may have had devices that I lent you, because I know that George Brown has devices, mobile devices that I can get a hold of if I need to, and then we could have tested it out on your favorite device, and you could have screencasted that device and showed it how it worked kind of in real time. Those kind of are really cool things. So yeah, that's fine. You can do it on an S10. I'm totally fine, right? And that's kind of what's due. Nothing out of the ordinary. I think your live presentation and all your submission requirements, this is actually worth 10%, not 15%. But for the most part, everything else is the same as if you've seen it before. There's nothing here that you haven't seen. Okay, so nothing out of the ordinary or out of whack at this point. Okay, so that's what's due. That's what's coming up. But what we want to focus on today is Unity's profiler. And I know you guys did that for your beta. That's great. Thank you for that. But what we want to do now is, you've got some screenshots of how you did from a profiling perspective in the past. And what I want you guys to do this week is we are going to use the memory profiling tutorial And I'd like you to be able to capture for your team. So you and your team get together, right? And I think I made this lab individual, but it's supposed to be a team lab. Make sure that I did that. So this is not a an individual lab, but rather a team lab. Okay, that's what it's supposed to be. And again, I need feedback from you. Okay, on this one. So maybe if one of you or a couple of you can come on, you represent a good portion of the class. I think that I don't want to make it so that it's again, it doesn't have to be oppressive. If you want me to do it so that it's individual, totally fine. We can do that. If you want to do it as a team, I'm fine with that too. What would be easier for you guys? It's really supposed to help you with your final profiling, right? So go ahead, Vincent.
Probably thinking like maybe one person could submit for and represent like the one person submits for the entire team or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so what it'd do is it works out so that way, even though it's individual, it kind of for those people who did badly in a couple labs or they didn't submit something, maybe they were late or they forgot or whatever, this is again yet another opportunity to bump up your marks a little bit more because it's a group thing. If one person does it and does it really well for, and kind of does it before and after shot, which is really what I'm looking for by following the tutorial, then I think it would be good enough for everybody. So yeah, so Herman, that's the question. So do we do it so it's on your, your projects as an example, or do we want to do it so that it's on your, kind of a project that we're doing in lab? I don't want to pressure you guys. If you feel it's going to be too much work for you guys to get together and do that, then that's not what I want. Where I want to go.
So do you want comments in the chat or
No, you can talk.
either or? I would. I'm in favor of group. To be honest.
Group, okay. How about you, Vince?
Oh.
Hold on. I'll come back to you, Sam. Group, okay. Mandeep says group, and Vince, to the group. Oh no, yeah. Oh, we're going to do a tech demo together. Don't worry about that. Like we'll do it together. Well, it's not. I'm not going to leave you to it on your own. I'm going to show you what I would do, and we'll work it together like normal, right? So that's not an issue for me, right? So yeah, so what I would do is I don't need your lab. I don't need a repository for your project. I just need before and after shots of your actual project itself. So you run your project, and then you show me your project running in in the emulator, right, as an example. And then what you do is you go, okay, so here's the before shots before any optimizations, which is right now, right? You kind of bring your before shots in there, and then make some changes, you optimize, and then you do your after shots, right? And say, okay, well here you can see that the memory requirements dropped, or whatever. Now going back, there's also some comments from Anna here saying maybe by choice. I can't do it by choice. I only have one option, right? Because notice there isn't a check mark where I can do either or. It's either individual, group, or that, and that's it. There isn't another option. I can't say you can choose. No, it's not like that, right? So if I make it a group, then it's everybody. It's a group. If I make it individual, it's individual, right? So that's the problem. No. As a team, yeah, yeah,
One person representing your group would send in a before and after
yeah,
screenshot.
and
Like
well, that's the thing. So yeah, it doesn't matter. That's exactly what I'm doing it for. I'm doing it for to give an opportunity for if as a group you can push everyone up. You know what I'm saying? Because For those people who missed a lab or two or three, as an example, and there are people out there who have done it, right? This will give you a chance to have a solid mark. You get together with your team. It's going to help you with your final project, so it's in line with what you're doing. That's what my thoughts are. But I don't want to pressure people either. Like Anna,
Oh,
if
I'm
Anna,
fine either or of them. It doesn't really matter. You guys
okay.
are-
Generally, the things I'm getting from you guys right now is that you prefer it to be a group thing, and I'm fine with that. But I just want to make sure no one's annoyed by it. That's all. So, yep. So we can do that. When do you want me to do that though, Herman? Do you want me to push it out to Sunday? Like, because really, I got there's another one coming up after this, right? So, which is another group one coming up, right? Because I got two. One is this one potentially, and the other one is the next week, which is your kind of a retrospective, right? So, I mean, I can push it out to Sunday if you want, but that's as far as it'll go. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. So if it's going to be Sunday, then if that's going to work for everybody, then we'll push it out a day. It'll be Sunday is the due date, right? So that's when it'll be closed to. And all I'm looking for is to use the performance profiler. If you follow the tutorial, right, that I've kind of attached to the slide deck that I've kind of got here at the end, it talks about how to do the performance profiling properly. It's right here. This is the tutorial for diagnosing problems with Unity, right? So what I want you guys to do, even though it's with 2019, is follow through. And what we're looking for with the memory performance profiling thing is show me your before and after shots. I only really care about two things. I only care about CPU usage, right, for the most part, and memory. Those two things are where I'm looking at. Rendering, I mean, with draw calls and all that stuff is important. Physics is okay too, but it's not as important as, in my mind, memory and CPU performance. Once I have those two, it affects everything else, right? So for the most part, okay? Now there's things you can do to improve those things, and a lot of times your rendering has a big effect on a mobile as well. But we'll talk about how this works. So please, this is the tutorial. I'm just gonna pass it to you guys. Sunday would be great. My group has been pretty busy. Yeah, I figured that. So here's the tutorial link for you guys to do it. Okay, and then I'm going to go through it with you as a tech demo. So it's going to be like, it's not going to directly affect what you're doing, but at least it'll show you how I struggle. I will struggle like along with everyone else to put it together to do a before and after shot, which we already have. We have a before shot. We can kind of gather information beforehand, see what it looks like, and then make some optimizations and see if that actually helps or does nothing. And the do nothing thing is actually a really it's always shocking when you try and do some optimization and it literally does nothing, which I've seen before too, by the way. All right, so that's kind of where this lab is going. And throughout the entire slide deck, which I share with you online, it talks about how to make everything work, right? So what you need to do is you need to make this a development build. Okay, so that's the one thing to do. So if you look through the the stuff that I've got up here for you. So basically the Unity profiler is a way of us getting performance information. That's number one, right? And what we want to do is things like CPU, memory, and renderer are the main things. Audio too, because audio takes up a lot of memory, but for mobile, the main are CPU, memory, renderer. Those are the main things. CPU and memory being the most important, renderer because of the number of draw calls, especially on things like VR and that kind of stuff. You want a memory profile and also how many draw calls you have because frame rate on VR is super important. If you have a drop in frame rate, bad things happen. Okay, just saying, it makes you sick. So that's what we were aiming for the memory stuff and the performance profiling. So what you want to do is you want to record data for our target platform. You're going to it allows us to do profiling in the Unity editor as well, and what it does is when we get a baseline, right, as an example, then what you want to do is after you get the baseline performance, what does it look like after you've done your optimizations? So that's kind of where we're going with this stuff. All right, so it's really pretty simple. I'm not going to go through and read these slides because really that's what we're doing. One thing that we want to do is we definitely want to put it in development build. Okay, and in the development build, you're going to get more information. And notice where it says Auto Connect Profiler here. And you can turn on deep profiling support as well. Once you've turned those things on, then you're going to have more information about your the performance of your game. Okay, so we'll talk about this in a sec as we try it out. Um, and sometimes what also happens is if you want to, you can also specify an IP address, especially if the game is on a mobile device or something like that. You can bake it so that it'll give you a connection from your IP address, and it'll record stuff even if it's a device that's connected as opposed to something like your editor. All right, so that's something that we can look at as well. Okay, so that is where we're going with the profiler window. There's also something to note whenever you do a build. There's some more information that we can get to from your window, your editor, when you're building, and how do you optimize from there. So we're going to be talking about that as well. Okay. So without further ado, without actually going through all this, these lovely screens and everything else, and talk about this, let's see if we can start doing it together. All right, which is something that I want you to do. So for now, going back to our lab, let's go back to this. Right now, the lab is lab 9 was meant to be individual, but what we've done is we're going to make it a group lab. It looks like most people want a group session, right? Again, any one of you can submit and it'll affect every other people. So if one person does it, it's good for everybody, right? So if, this is an opportunity for you project managers, producers to say, hey, QA person that was supposed to do it, this is your responsibility for the entire team, and it's going to represent the entire team. So only one person needs to really kind of engage themselves fully on this thing. Although I recommend, you share that information with everybody on the team, right? There's nothing wrong with doing that. So let me kind of select all for this one as well. So I think that's why it's a good thing to do. I don't think it's negative. So only one person needs to submit. And it'll be the same stuff for next week when we come together, because I think it'll give us an opportunity for you to submit. Now it says add your lab 9 folder to the master repo, and you would submit this as an additional lab because you're going to basically instead of the master repo itself, what I'm looking at is your lab 9 folder will literally be just screenshots and that kind of stuff that you're going to store. So I can actually look at the screenshots. You're going to take a small video when you show me your profiling, so I can actually see that you're doing the profiling. So it's not just a matter of just screenshots, but I want the screenshots that are going to be stored inside of your lab 9 folder itself. Okay, so that's how it's going to have to work. Otherwise, I mean, really, you can get memory profile pictures from the web. I don't want that. I want to see you memory profiling on your project. All right, so that's kind of how it's going to work if you want this to work properly. All right, so that is what I want. And let's try getting started with a project that we had from last day. So last day, we were working together on first. So here's the first part of our tech demo, and I'll start with section 400 from an optimization perspective. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this thing, lab 8, to talk about how this is going to work. So I'm just going to copy paste it. So again, make a new folder, and we'll do a game 3004 winter 2022 lab 9. Again, this will just be for you to use as a tech demo, but not necessarily what we're doing for today. You're going to be doing it with your project. Okay, so I'm going to grab all this except for library and builds. Let's kind of grab that and go over here and pop it into this. And I'll kind of do the same thing for the next group. When we start off on Thursday this week, we'll do more. Okay, so let's think about how this is going to work. And can anyone think about? I mean, I mentioned an optimization. I said object pools. That's an optimization. What other optimizations can we use? Does anyone have any ideas of what they can do to make this more optimized? And what do we really start with an optimization now to think about what the optimizations generally are, or do you think it's better that we make it targeted? What are your thoughts? Anyone can answer. Yeah, go ahead, Vince. Yep.
I think that
Yeah. Okay. So those are things to try. Sam says he'd like to investigate first and then see what the diagnostics tell him and then start doing stuff. Um, yeah, like these are all good, reasonable things. Like what you're talking about here is you want to investigate first, see where your problems are, get some reporting, and once you have your reporting down, then try and figure out, okay, so what do I do? Because this is where my problems are. This is going to point to some problems for you, absolutely for sure. Okay, so we're going to use our project to see, or the one that we've been using this semester as a lab, when we built it up, and we've got some stuff that we can look at, and let's see if we can find some bottlenecks, and that does the performance profiler help us troubleshoot, help us look and point in a certain direction. Because remember, whenever we want to package up our project for a build at the end, you want to get it so that its performance is way high, as high as possible. Yeah, moving outside the update. I also think that's another thing. Removing empty start and update calls. I'll tell you right now, if you have functions that have classes that have empty start and updates, get rid of those things, guys. All right. Why? Because remember that the way that Unity works is if it sees a start or update function inside of your mono behavior classes, it's going to go there and look, right? And you don't want that to happen, especially if it's something that's part of like an enemy class. Imagine you have an enemy class and you have both a start and an update function that's completely useless. You don't even use those things for whatever reason. Get rid of them. You're going to see a boost. Any debug logs are synchronous. Get rid of that stuff. That is the worst thing you can possibly have in your code. Debug logs. Get rid of debug logs. Get it kind of any of those things that are in there, because that slows things down. So you don't want those in there unless you're doing some kind of development debugging. So comment that stuff out. If anything, what you want to do is you want to use preprocessor commands to help you debug, as opposed to debugging itself. Oh yeah, you got to think about how debugging. When I do a debug log, I'm outputting, right, and it doesn't matter if you're in a release mode or not. It's still going to try to output. Look at logcat as a good example. Even if I'm developing on a machine, any kind of output goes somewhere, right? So that is a synchronous call. That means the next thing that happens, I got to wait for that output to be done. It's not asynchronous because I'm not running it in a coroutine, which means it's blocking. It's blocking code. So imagine if I'm putting out something like a debug log every frame or something crazy. It's definitely going to slow down your stuff. In fact, in general, doesn't matter when you're working on the web, as an example, or if let's say I make a Node.js application, any console logs or anything like that, man, that's the worst thing you can have for any kind of like back end, kind of calls, because what it'll do is it'll slow things down. So we never want those. All right, so let's get back to this then. So we have our scene from last day, and I'm just going to bring up our scenes. Last time what we were working with is something called Procedural, and we created a very simple procedural world. That's what we did, and we also built for Android, and we put it out there, as well. When we build, right? When we build, one thing about the console, right, to note is on the right-hand side here, you have a bunch of additional information, okay, that it gives us. All right, so that's one thing to note here. There is not just a log entry, but other things as well. For example, the editor log. Here's an example of the editor log from the last build that we did, okay? So if you go to any console log, so from last day, and if you go here to the ellipses and you go to editor log, open editor log, please do that, then it'll show you some information that's built just for the editor. So it'll tell you the last build you did, and it'll also look at things like your memory setup and a bunch of stuff. And if you scroll down a little bit, It'll talk about what packages were used. Look at all this stuff, right? And as well as, the type of card that I'm running locally. Mine's a NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3070. That's my card. The memory availability that I use, the driver version, all that stuff. It gives you a lot of information from your build, right? When you're building up your stuff. So that's what it does. And if you scroll down, there's a ton of information that it actually includes that's in here. And I'm not sure you guys are aware of that, but that's something that's always in here. And if you scroll down enough, you can see that it gives you pretty much the entire build process. Now, down in the bottom, right, it also tells you the init time, and a bunch of other stuff in terms of integration of assets, thread wait time, and a bunch of other times. And memory consumption went from, for how much it's going to be using and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in here that we want to use. All right, so that's kind of like a summary of everything that's inside of your project, which is kind of cool. So that's very nice. And I think the great thing about this, even though it looks like a lot of gobbledygook and stuff, it actually gives you a lot of information in terms of how things are running, right? And what to remove. What about other things? Here's a question for you. What about those assets? You get a lot of assets inside of that's in the top right corner. So if you go to the top right corner of a console log, you can go to open editor log. Open player log is very similar, right? And so player log and editor log. Okay, so those are the two things. So there's their editor log. Editor log, again, if you go to open player log, it would be here. Open editor log is this. It's kind of a notepad entry that comes up. So that's what this is. And it talks about everything from packages to the packages used, where they're located, right? As an example, where they come from. And there's quite a bit of information on the number of seconds that were used to build it up, and a bunch of stuff. So, okay, this is the stuff that we get when we do our build, okay? And you can also search for it. So if you do like kind of a build report, that's what we want. We want a build report. And right now there is no build report. This is just us launching. Okay, so let's go to the next thing and try this out. Yes, well, we'll talk about how to prune in a second. Okay, so let's suppose I have this little project, and this is from last day. So how does it work? I would run it, right? And let's run the project first to see how it's working. So here it is. We've got our little project, and this is what we kind of did last day. We can see that we have movement, and we have shadows, and a bunch of other stuff that's here. And we've done some optimizations. Yay, it's awesome. Great. Fantastic. Okay, so that's what we did last day. So then in the scene view, we have pretty much nothing in here, but we want to build this for mobile. So I want to kind of do a build settings. And in the build settings, we have procedural checked for today anyway. And notice on the right, we have development build. Look at this. Here's development build. We want to click that on. And there's auto connect profiler. We want to click that on. Deep profiling support. We want to click that on. All right. And we want to do that for Android because this is what we want to do. I want to kind of click Android on. I want to switch platforms for Android. Let's do that. So first thing first, you build you kind of switch to your device, whatever that is. Okay, try it out with the little app from as practice. Okay, it's no problem. Now there's some things we're also going to talk about, like we're going to go into project settings, into graphics, and we're going to do a bunch of stuff. So what, Chris, the good thing about unused assets is, yes, you can build smaller. If you're not going to use them anymore, get rid of them. Get rid of the assets you don't need. But there is a level of pruning that happens with our assets themselves. So the only assets that can built into your project are the ones that you use. If you're not using something, then it won't be built into your project. However, if they're in the hierarchy and disabled, they're in the project. Just letting you know. So anything that's in here that we're not using in the project. So we can see what it looks like when we put it in and we take it out. But Unity has some really neat built-in optimizations. And one of them is the whole prefabs idea. There's prefabs. All these prefabs are like prototypes. That's what they are. And because they're prototypes already, they share a lot of information, things like the material and the textures and everything else. So that's why prefabs are so awesome, and how it helps us when it comes to Unity. Let's go to player settings for a second and start with that. Again, we want to capture a baseline. So we're going to start with Lab 9. We're not going to do any optimizations first because that's dumb, right? I mean, you could, but, and you won't see the differences if it even did anything that you try to do. So first we just run the game as is. We've kind of used best practices. Notice the color space that I have on is linear, and my auto graphics API is checked on. Again, I know that I'm not going to run, it's using Vulkan and OpenGLES because we tried to make it so that it supports compute shaders. That's why this thing is on, okay? But otherwise, at the end of the day, right, if your machine doesn't support it, that means your device, then it doesn't matter if we check this on or off, all right? It just won't support it. Memory settings are here, right? So it says that you can certainly go here and mess with your memory settings manually. Physics is important to take a look at as well to see if anything that you don't need to collide is checked off. That's important as well from a perspective, performance perspective. Quality is huge, and this is where we're going to spend some time on Thursday as well when we talk about what makes good quality, what is the default, what is the bare level that we want. Notice that from an Android perspective, we're using medium, but we can also make our own quality level, all right? And we can try and optimize from there. So it says a scriptable render pipeline is in use. Some settings will not be used and are hidden because we're using the scriptable render pipeline here, right? Which is kind of on the side because that's what we have our pipeline asset here. And between the two of them and the renderer, we can also see that the rendering path is forward. And by the way, please don't try and do deferred. Deferred rendering, I'm not sure how that's going to work well on a mobile device. Remove internal tiles optimization have any impact on map generation? No. Yeah. So I'm not sure if it's going to, if it's not something I recommend that's going to help right now, Sam, but we'll see if it helps us at all. Same thing with override, stencil, and anything else here that you got to be very careful about what it supports. OpenGLES, and if you assume that there's no Vulkan, then going back to this, then like we said, forward is probably where you want to leave it, not deferred. How many lights are in the scene? That's a huge difference. If you have more than 3 or 4 lights in the scene, you should question why, and you may want to turn them off as you progress. So only the character when they need light has a light. So it's not like every pixel on the screen is being affected by multiple lights. That's crazy. So if you have a lot of lighting and it looks awesome on a mobile device, it's going to kill it, right? It's going to heat the crap out of it. So please turn your lights off unless you need them. So that's something that we can also, those are general things we talked about. Unless you need them, unless they're going to make a huge difference in the scene, optimize, reduce, right? And those kind of things. Here we only have a directional light, so we don't have a lot in terms of that. But however, things to look at are things like soft shadows and baked lighting whenever we can. Also helps in optimization as well. Again, we're going to talk about this more on a Thursday. Let's build this thing with development build, auto connect profiler, and deep profiling support. Let's turn these things on, and let's see what happens when I do that. So first, let's run LD player. Let's bring that up. And deferred rendering is neat. It's great, but the thing is, it has other issues, especially when it comes to things like transparencies and overlays and a bunch of other stuff. So it's great for lighting if you want to do additional, what you want to pre-render everything. But on the downside, there's stuff that deferred rendering doesn't do so well. All right, so it's good for some things and not good for other things. Okay, but it's a neat technique to figure out. Okay, so there's your Android. I'm ready to do my build and run right now. I'm not optimizing anything, just build and run. And let's choose a builds folder. So we'll say builds. And we'll just do the lab 9 over here. Lab 9, and save inside the builds folder. And let's do its thing. Now I'm going to probably spark out here. So if you're going to hear my voice be staticky, it's because of this. Yes, Vince. Is that a hand? It's not a hand anymore?
No, because I think I may have had something else in regards to like potential optimizations, but I think my thought left the building at that point.
Sorry, I know I ran off a little bit, but that's how this build goes, all right? Because that's where we want to go to first. So let's do the build, see what happens, and see what we get when we do this auto connect profiler stuff and support and everything else from mobile device connected, all right? What I'm going to do is specify which device. I'm so sorry. It's just, it is what it is. And it's not my machine. My machine's pretty powerful, so it's not that. It's just it uses a lot of the GPU to do it. So, and my because I'm using Zoom uses my GPU as well. That's where I take a hit, a memory hit, and a performance hit in general. So it's really weird. But it's only on when I'm using Zoom. I don't really see it. I also get it on. I also see it on OBS. Did I go off again?
You're a little bit more audible this time, but definitely it is sparking about. It's sparking about, but we could hear you that time.
I would love to hear it. I don't hear myself, so I don't know what it sounds like, right? So
you want to like record it?
No, no, it's fine. It's already embarrassing the way it is that it's so bad. I wish I had another machine to show you guys, but maybe that's what I'll do the next time. No, you know what I'll do next time? I'll maybe what we'll do is I'll have two machines. One machine to record what I'm doing here, and the other machine just to actually I'll do it remote on that machine, and you can see it build.
Awesome.
Yeah, because otherwise, this is going to happen every time. So I got to figure that out. I got to talk about it with maybe do some brainstorming with Alex on that one. He's got some really good ideas, that Alex. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, essentially, like your voice effect would be like a voice modulator, so it's going to be like the next Mass Effect or something.
All right, that's awesome. So okay, this is taking like well, I'm also doing a development build. So these are things that's going to take longer. I'm doing a development build. I'm using Auto Connect Profiler. I'm deprofiling support. I'm adding in all this extra stuff. So it's going to be slow. Right? You need to do that, guys. If you're going to do any kind of profiling, it doesn't make sense not to do this because it's going to give us more information. Okay? So bear with it as we go. So you can see all these out files that it's doing, right? It's kind of an intermediate build right now. We're getting into right now. So typically it does take around 4 to 5 minutes to do properly. So let's see what it does. And we're also using procedural, which means that it's going to be even more demanding because of all the draw calls and everything else I'm getting it to do. So we should see a real effect on it. I think this is a good test. It might be. Yeah, I'm almost 5 minutes too. So try not to speak too much. But hopefully you guys, the worst is over when it comes to performance. You're in. Woo, awesome. You're better than me, Vince. Go. Oh, I'm almost there too. Let's see how it goes. All right. So, yeah. Is anyone else feeling anything negative? So we think that GBC is going to start teaching UE5. I mean, they just released it. So they just released it yesterday, I think it is, right? So that's when it was released. Or was it today? So it wasn't really, I mean, I think they will. I think they must. We also have to keep on top of things. I have to tell you that with a build size of like 50 gigs full out, that's pretty crazy. It's pretty massive.
Also, bold to assume that the conventional student has a machine that will run Unreal Engine 5.
Yes, and that is another issue. Okay, so you can see here that I've got my some information right now that's running. And I'm just going to go to my LD player and see what's going on, if it's going to run. So it's taking its sweet time to build, which is interesting. Because normally we would see the project right here, and I'm not seeing a project. You? Is your project coming up in LD player? Because mine, oh, there it is.
There it is.
That's what happens with these builds, right? So we're going to kind of run it, and we'll look around, and we'll move around. It runs, but let's save our thing here, and we're just going to march forward. And let's see if we can kind of do a load. Let's do a load. There it is. And let's do a regen. So I'll press R, right? And then hopefully it'll do its regen in a second. Oh yeah, it's working. And we should see some information come from our editor. It's taking a sweet time. It's really, now there is some overhead. I have to admit this to you as well. Whenever we do a development build, and whenever we do a profiler, there is built-in overhead, and it tells you what the overhead is as well. You can remove that overhead when it comes to your overall performance. But this is a good example of what's happening here, how it's like nicely frozen and how it takes time for it to launch. I just press the R button, try it for you, right? And we can, oh, there it is. Finally, I'm back. So that's how long it took for me to do a regen on this thing. And I wonder what the settings are. It looks pretty, maybe I did a 64 by 64. I don't know what I did here. All right, cool. And let's do a load and see what happens. Okay, cool. So it actually did work anyway, and we loaded from where we were before. And so that's pretty cool. Let's take a look at Unity and see what's happening. So there you are. Look at this. So there's our CPU. There's our main thread. And now you can see that it's, we want to record information, right? This is just showing right now. We're not recording anything right now. We're seeing the GPU, right? And we can open this up. Let's open up this whole graph. And in here, you can see rendering, right? Batch counts and so on, and memory. And what we're looking for is, here's our audio, total audio CPU stuff. We don't have any audio right now, but you can see what's happening. Here's physics, if any. UI, that's me as well when I'm doing all this work. There's a bit of overhead, so we're starting to get some information here as we go forward, but we haven't started recording yet. This is, you can see the number of frames that have transpired. You can look at kind of, you can isolate the stuff you're looking for. So if I don't care about physics or animations, because I don't have a lot of animations here, the garbage collector, what's happening, you can see what that does for us. Here's VSync and global illumination. So how it contributes to the performance hit, as an example. This is your UI, right, which is the purple stuff. And then finally, others. And others seems to take up a nice amount of spike information. But I want to take off others, and then I want to see rendering. Let's see how that rendering part looks as an example. And let's start recording, right? We'll start recording just from the rendering profile itself. And we'll just do record. Okay, so starting to record. We'll go back into my profile here, and we'll start playing around with it. We'll see how the draw calls work and everything else. Woo, we'll move it around, and we'll move. So, and see if we can get any kind of information. And then we'll do a bit of a stop. and see what happens. Okay, so I'll go back and you can see we've recorded. We'll stop recording. Okay, and so we got a bit of, we can kind of go back, right, as an example. So we can kind of look and see when it stops and starts. And it says, hey, I can save my current profiling information to a binary file. I can do that, right? So I can save it as data if I want to, right? And I can load a binary profiling file from a file as well. So these are things we can see. I can also look at it from colorblind mode if that helps you, right? So that's pretty cool. We can also show stats for the current frame. So that's everything from all the different pieces that we have here. So this is our rendering. Let's see how there's a bunch of spikes here from a rendering perspective. And you can see it's trying to run it at, 60 frames. Here's 60 frames per second. Here's 30 frames per second. We kind of drop down. That's a kind of a hit in terms of some of those parts there when we spike down below 60 frames per second, right? And you can see sometimes as we continue to talk, because I'm not really using it, sometimes it'll grow even faster, right? So we're kind of getting it even faster than 60 frames per second. That's rendering. What about, so that's that part. That's CPU usage, okay? And then we can look at other things here. We can look at memory. There's our memory. And there's total memory used. Let's take away from this stuff and start unchecking some of these things. And here's our object count. We don't have any much object count in here going on, right? There's our material counts, right? So that's what this is and how much that is taking up, right? And you can see that the total memory used is 151. And let's see if memory changes when we do we kind of do a revamp, okay? So if I go back to this part, and if I press R, let's see what kind of hit we're getting here when it comes to memory. So here, everything stopped. As soon as I pressed R, you can see that, I'm taking a bit of a hit here, right? And even if I bring up my scripts and everything else that I've got going on, let's just turn it all on for a second. Notice that nothing is moving anymore, right? As I'm doing something, there's something going on when I turned all this on for a second. Now, you don't need all of this because I'm not doing animation or physics right now. Maybe some physics, but scripts, how much that takes up. But am I back is the question. And the answer is no, I'm not back yet. So that's what's happened. When I press that R button, that's where a lot of, all right, there we go. So look at that hit right there. That was me doing what I just did. So that spike was a CPU spike that went from like a serious reduction in frames to almost 0 frames here, which is crazy, right? So that's something that you can look at as well. Like you can kind of look at the numbers at any point, right? And you can look at it. So if I turn it off just for a second, and if I want to kind of look back, remember that anything that I record, it's here. It says auto connected to player, which is kind of a cool thing, right? If I turn it on, that's when I'm recording again. You can see that's how kind of a lower level that I have in here. So again, things that I can record. Let's go back to it before we move on. I'm just going to move this down here for a second. We can record video, physics. You can focus on whatever you want. There's your UI, network operations, if any, real-time global illumination, if that was a thing. It's not. Virtual texturing, adaptive performance, which we've got turned off, so we don't care about those kind of things yet. We'll talk about adaptive performance on Thursday as well a little bit. Audio, again, it says total audio CPU. That's me talking right now because it's recording that too, right? Because I am doing that, right? So we should probably turn it off because it's not something that is relevant to us, right? But for the most part, this is all the stuff it talks about. If I go to deep profile, right? So there's deep profiling. Then it'll do more, it'll gather more information if I want as well. And it'll save it, like I said, when I want to. All right, so that's what it looks like off the cuff. Let's stop this insanity for a second. And let's get back to this piece and also kill this part. Remember what I said, that any kind of debugging like this, game data saved and loaded, that is synchronous. Okay, so that's blocking. We should take those away, even though they're small. And the other thing that we can think about also, right, when it comes to this is the editor, the console. Remember the console, right? Let's take a look and see what the console gave us. So if I go here and if I go open the editor log, then again, we can see this is the build log that we did before. It talks about the same stuff, and it gives us a few some pieces of information in terms of how we built what we did last time. So what we want to see is some kind of build report is what we want. And if I go to build report, I can go down and I can see where most of my problems are. Where are most of my problems, guys? Take a look at this little thing, build report. Where are most of my problems in here? Textures, right? Look at that, 9.7 megabytes on textures. Where the heck are my textures that they're 9.7 megabytes? I only have that one texture that I'm using, right? Okay, but that's 68% of my uncompressed usage by category. Meshes, I've got 5.9%. Shaders, 14%. That's from me being in URP. I guarantee you, we can reduce our shader well. There's some things we can do there. And that kind of adds up our complete build size, which is 573.6 megabytes, my friends. That's huge, right? So build report is really interesting because it kind of talks about how big my my build is. There's additional information that go from one for everything that you have in here. If you look after the build report, if you actually search for build report, if you scroll down, you'll see that there is every texture that you're using and how it's affecting the game. Even though, take a look, even though we are not including our gold texture or our lift-off head or anything like that right now, because our scene does not include it, because it's inside of there, it's included, right, as something that we're doing. So this is where you can start pruning some stuff from your project. You can see this. These are all the textures and how much it actually weighs in terms of total kilobytes, right? All this stuff here. And you can see how big it is. What we really care about is materials, and we care about textures, things that we can control. So anything pretty much from here up, right, are the things that we want to kind of look at. And this is our first line of defense. How do I get rid of or reduce some of this here, right here? Look at 1.5 megabytes for, which is 0.3% of my total build side, is the Unity render pipeline, the universal render pipeline, the URP, shaders, post-processing, Uber post shader. 1.5 megabytes, guys, from being in URP mode. Okay? It's huge. Huge, right? So that's the stuff that we can start thinking about. How do I reduce? What do I do? Do I even want to use URP in our case if we're not doing anything that crazy? This is what the overhead it loads in there. The also Text Mesh Pro, look at that. 1 megabyte on Liberation Sans SDF asset, right? That's still bigger than anything else. And overall, it's not a bad build size, to be honest. Like, this is not too crazy in terms of everything that we're doing. But there's some things we can control, and some of it is in here. So let's go to the next ones. All of these, which is the gravel cobble, the textures gold, texture R, N, and M, all this stuff is things that we can use. And because we're using our gravel cobble texture right now, we're using these for our scene. That's also going to be in effect as well. Anything like that, all the textures take up the most. Always. Okay? Just to give you a sense of it. So just some guidelines. Things that we did in this scene is one thing. Let's just do one more thing here, and I'll do one more build. So let's go into, and then we'll stop for the day because I think we're way over. But let's go into our, instead of procedural, let's hop to our main scene again. Our main scene, remember what it did is it uses this. Okay, this is our main scene. And if you thought procedural was bad, let's see what this does for us when we do our builds. So again, if I go to File, Build Settings, let's leave it with Development Build on, but we'll also check off the procedural scene and check on the main, please. Do that. Okay. And let's just do another build and run. Remember that even though the main scene has been checked off from before, doesn't mean it's not included. Okay. So let's just build and run and see what happens. And by the way, if your default device, if it's not here, let's do a refresh and make sure you target the device that's your emulator just to make sure. And let's just do a build and run and see what happens. I'm going to target Lab 9 again. And let's see if it's going to take me another 5 minutes. And if it will, and if I spark out again, guys, that's where we'll start. Yeah.
When you say like recording, and then it's like when you save your log somewhere into a check your editor log. I didn't get a chance. I tried to look up the build report, but I didn't end up seeing it. Do you have to have your build running? Like
no. You have to build. If you build right afterwards, you have to look at the build report. That's important. If you run it in the editor, you'll lose your build report. So that's what happens, right? So build report's important. That's pretty fast. I'll do it with you. So look, so I'm already built again. So now you can see that I'm not recording those. So let's record. There we go. And you can see now that I'm getting okay, so there's a couple things. There's physics. Take a look at this physics stuff. And this is a different scene. And you can see memory usage, right? And let's look at garbage collection for memory as well. And you can see that it's running around, sometimes it's mostly running around 30 frames per second. Take a look at that. Like 60 frames per second, it's here, but it looks how it's pushing down to 30 frames per second. Okay, so and look at all this. Look at all these physics spikes, dude. Lots of crazy physics spike here. So what does this look like in the game? So let's go back to our game. Oh yeah, this guy is like coming at me. He's already here, right? And I'm already, kind of done. I'm going to kind of do this. Let's move around in the scene. This is actually built. So let's move. And remember that he's also on a nav mesh and all that stuff as well. So let's see what our performance is like immediately. So what you want to do is little tests and then go back and see what the effect is going to be. And again, you can turn off stuff like, okay, global illumination, not much of an effect. Animations, there is an effect now with animation, because animation you can clearly see is going to have issues, right? Because we have animations happening right now. Rendering is important. Scripts, that's huge. Look how much kind of effect scripts have, right? So things from scripts, from CPU usage. Physics, right? We can turn that off and on, right? Garbage collector, not much. VSync, look at that VSync stuff. It's huge. So it definitely adds to the total amount. But what we want to focus on is this rendering. This is where we have the most spikes. Look at that spike happening here. And you want to isolate that. So let's say you look at one thing at a time. So you start off and you sit there and say, okay, well, if rendering is a problem, let's say when we have rendering issues, you can see that we have several spikes that drive us down below the 60 frames per second mark, like way up here at these intervals. All right, so we do a little bit of performance tests, right? So we kind of move through here and let's see what happens when we're rendering. And then scoop back. Do you see a kind of a hit here? And you can see also we're rendering something and then it came back down to normal. See that? So again, right? And you can see that we took a bit of a spike there when I started going. That's our rendering, right? As we started to render, there was a bit of a spike that took us below 30 frames per second momentarily. Okay. And memory is still pretty stable though. Memory, is sitting at around 107 megabytes of memory to 118. You're looking at that for total memory usage. So if I looked at only total memory, so again, you can turn off all these things. Total memory is 107, okay? And again, this is your baseline. You'd be looking at your baseline, take a snapshot, see what this looks like, and then see if a technique is going to make a difference here, okay? And you can definitely see there's stuff going on in physics, where last time when we did our last one, we didn't see much going on here before. But of course it's going to make a difference, because probably behind us we have our little guy who is just kicking us. And every time he's hitting us, the reason why physics is kicking off is because most likely he's affecting our collider. And those are the spikes that we're seeing here. Every single time he hits me, physics is kicking off. And I'm getting a bit of a spike on that too. And does it correlate with my CPU usage, my rendering? It does, doesn't it? Look at how these spikes are all kind of in line, right? So every time this guy is hitting me, that's physics, that using the physics engine, right? And the great thing about this is you can do, well, this, right, where you can kind of look at the stuff and see what this thing is doing as we're moving. This is more of an interactive view. So if I move around, okay, take a look as we're moving around, what's happening here to this thing here. Look, moving around the scene, and we can see what's happening with my rendering, my draw calls, right? And what's happening here, right? And what happens when I move off the scene, when I teleport back on, what's going on there, right? So move around, and you see with the rendering, how the rendering is being affecting, how it's really taking a hit, right? And let's go, if I jump on here, where's the physics coming from now? If I jump on, right, notice that I took a bit of a jump. There's my jump, right? So you can start thinking about how, oh, look, he's up here already. He tracked me, right? Because he's looking at it from, from everything else. Networking is not going on because we're not doing multiplayer, so you can probably turn all this off. We don't care about networking too much. That's not something we really care about. In fact, remember that a lot of these things here, right? If I want to, these are just lines. Network and network operations, there's 0 happening here. But UI, layout, and renderer, that's something that's going on. We have to look at those. Look at those spikes here, right? Those are the things we're looking at here. Real-time global illumination is not turned on, like we said, so these things we can ignore. But here, rendering is huge. Okay, so let's turn off rendering, and let's see if how the other stuff works. Let's look at scripts. And do we have a spike when it comes to any kind of scripting that we can do? Is there anything we can optimize when it comes to my script itself and how it can be affected? So let's bring this down here. Yeah. Okay, so let me show you where that is. So when you built, let's drop out of the player for a second. So here's my player, and let's just kill it, right? And even if let's just drop out of the profiler for a second and drop out of this one, logcat too. Okay, so first, before you do anything else, go to console. This is where you want to look at it, Vince. Under console, on the ellipses here, you want to go to open editor log right here. See it?
Yeah.
And then you control F, and you find your build report, find. And that's when you look. And this is where you see the build size right here. Okay?
Oh, do you have to be under the build it?
No, no. Okay, so that now if I run it here locally, and if I run the build on my editor, you can see that I still have the same capability. I still got hurt and whatever, but I don't have my profiler running right now, right? But if I stop running this and if I go to editor, and if I go to open player log, nothing. If I go to open editor log, right now, if I do a control F and try and find a build report, sometimes what it'll do is it won't give you one if you haven't run an actual build, right? It'll only do a boot up report. Here I'm getting one. This is the last build report I got based on the last successful full build, right? That's where I'm getting that from. So time stops, line log entries are here, what you see here. Stack trace, if you got any errors, you can actually turn some of this stuff on as well. And so on. So yeah, so that's how it starts off. But where I got that was if you go to build settings, you need to turn on auto connect profiler check and deep profiling support check. Those two things have to be checked on.
Yeah,
Do,
I have that.
oh, okay.
I have my device here, or at least my LD player virtual device.
It should see, so when it comes on, it should do the auto profiling connection. Yeah.
Oh, dev build, auto connect profile.
No, no. In the player settings, I didn't do anything different. So again, resolution and presentation is full screen window. It's not resizable because, of course, it's on a device. Native aspect ratio, all that stuff is normal. Other settings I'm using is linear for color space and auto graphics API. But otherwise, all this stuff is as normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, stack trace, if you wanted to have any other kind of, this is another great area here if you wanted to do any troubleshooting like debugging. You can turn some of these on too. When it comes to, if I want to see other things, like if I want to do full, so see where it says log type, script only, and there's other errors you can turn on. This is important too when you're running it, if you wanted to do that. So yeah, that's the basics. The basics are you build, you turn these things on, and when you do that, and if I just do a build and run, because I haven't changed anything right now, if I just did another build and run right now, it's going to do an incremental build. And when I do an incremental build, it's going to build it and run it with my profiler. And that's where you want to start, guys. And that's what we're going to start with on the Thursday. Okay? Any questions before we go for the day? So that's it. That's all the time. We're way over. I don't want to keep everybody here because I know I'm killing you guys. I know. Sorry. But there you can see that this turns on, and then all we have to do is just start recording. And as soon as we start recording, we start looking at different parts. So scripts, you can look at physics, how that's affecting us right now. I can see that every time I take a punch or whatever, I'm getting spikes, right? Animations. It's weird. Yeah, you should have that. We'll have to look at it again on thing. Oh, one more thing down in here, timeline. This is interesting as well, where it actually gives you like as it's going, it's giving you more information down in here in terms of the camera and some stuff that's going on here. So there's other things you can do. You can always pause your, this stuff as well. So here's the current frame. I can go to the previous frame, or if I want to look at, kind of the previous frame and the previous frame to go back, I can look back at what I was looking at before. That's this part. And I can go and go to the current frame again. But yeah, if I turn auto connected player from this to play mode, then you're going to see this. So play mode. Let's stop recording here for a second. And I think you have to go to.
Do you enter any sort of ID address?
No. No.
No?
Nope.
Why doesn't it auto connect my player?
It shouldn't have a problem connecting. I mean, unless you have. But we'll go through some troubleshooting steps on Thursday.
Sure.
Okay. But that's really it, guys, for today. I just wanted to kind of talk about this and how do we troubleshoot with the stuff that we have, and how do we optimize. There's a lot of little optimization steps we can take from here on. All right, that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much. I'll stop recording here, and we'll get together on Thursday and talk more about how to use this properly. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You too.